Welcome. We finished chapter 2 yesterday of Roughing It by Mark Twain. Chapter 3. About an hour and a half before daylight, we were bowling along smoothly over the road, so smoothly that our cradle only rocked in a gentle, lulling way that was gradually soothing us to sleep and dulling our consciousness. When something gave away under us, we were dimly aware of it, but indifferent to it. The coach stopped. We heard the driver and conductor talking together outside and rummaging for a lantern and swearing because they could not find it. But we had no interest in whatever had happened, and it only added to our comfort to think of those people out there at work in the murky night and we snug in our nest with the curtains drawn. But presently, by the sounds, there seemed to be an examination going on, and then the driver's voice said, "By George, the thoroughbraces broke." This startled me broad awake, as an undefined sense of calamity is always apt to do. I said to myself, now, a thoroughbrace is probably part of a horse, and doubtless a vital part, too. From the dismay in the driver's voice, leg, maybe. And yet, how could he break his leg waltzing along such a road as this? No, it can't be his leg. That's impossible, unless he was reaching for the driver. Now, what can be the thoroughbrace of a horse, I wonder? Well, whatever comes, I shall not air my ignorance in this crowd anyway. Just then, the conductor's face appeared at a lifted curtain, and his lantern glared in on us and our wall of mail matter. He said, "Gents, you'll have to turn out a spell. Thoroughbrace is broke." We climbed out into a chill drizzle and felt ever so homeless and dreary when I found that the thing they called a thoroughbrace was the massive combination of belts and springs which the coach rocks itself in. I said to the driver, "I never saw a thoroughbrace used up like that before that I can remember. How did it happen?" "Why, it happened by trying to make one coach carry 3 days' mail. That's how it happened," said he. "And right here is the very direction which is wrote on all the newspaper bags which was to be put out for the Injuns for them to keep quiet. It's most uncommon lucky because it's so nation dark. I should have gone by unbeknowns if that air thoroughbrace hadn't broke." I knew he was in labor with another of those winks of his, though I could not see his face because he was bent down at work. And wishing him a safe delivery, I turned to and helped the rest get out the mail sacks. It made a great pyramid by the roadside when it was all out. When they had mended the thoroughbrace, we filled the two booths again, but put no mail on top, and only half as much inside as there was before. The conductor bent all the seat backs down and then filled the coach just half full of mail bags from end to end. We objected loudly to this, for it left us no seats. But the conductor was wiser than we and said a bed was better than seats. And moreover, this plan would protect his thoroughbraces. We never wanted any seats after that. The lazy bed was infinitely preferable. I had many an exciting day subsequently lying on it, reading the statutes and the dictionary, and wondering how the characters would turn out. The conductor said he would send back a guard from the next station to take charge of the abandoned mailbags, and we drove on. It was now just dawn, and as we stretched our cramped legs full length on the mail sacks and gazed out through the windows across the wide wastes of greensward clad in cool powdery mist to where there was an expectant look in the eastern horizon, our perfect enjoyment took the form of a tranquil and contented ecstasy. The stage whirled along at a spanking gait, the breeze flapping curtains and suspended coats in a most exhilarating way. The cradle swayed and swung luxuriously, the pattering of the horse's hooves, the cracking of the driver's whip, and his hi-yi glang were music. The spinning ground and the waltzing trees appeared to give us a mute hurrah as we went by, and then slack up and look after us with interest. or envy or something. And as we lay and smoked the pipe of peace and compared all this luxury with the years of tiresome city life that had gone before it, we felt that there was only one complete and satisfying happiness in the world, and we had found it. After breakfast, at some station whose name I have forgotten, we three climbed up on the seat behind the driver and let the conductor have our bed for a nap. And by, when the sun made me drowsy, I lay down on my face on top of the couch, grasping the slender iron railing, and slept for an hour or more. That will give one an appreciable idea of those matchless roads. Instinct will make a sleeping man grip a fast hold of the railing when the stage jolts, but when it only swings and sways, no grip is necessary. Overland drivers and conductors used to sit in their places and sleep 30 or 40 minutes at a time on good roads while spinning along at the rate of 8 or 10 miles an hour. I saw them do it often. There was no danger about it. A sleeping man will seize the irons in time when the coach jolts. These men were hard worked, and it was not possible for them to stay awake all the time. By and by, we passed through Marysville and over the Big Blue and Little Sandy, hence about a mile, and entered Nebraska. About a mile further on, we came to the Big Sandy, 180 miles from St. Joseph. As the sun was going down, we saw the first specimen of an animal known familiarly over 2,000 miles of mountain and desert from Kansas clear to the Pacific Ocean as the jackass rabbit. He is well named. He is just like any other rabbit, except that he is from one third to twice as large, has longer legs in proportion to his size, and has the most preposterous ears that ever were mounted on any creature but a jackass. When he is sitting quiet, thinking about his sins, or is absent minded or unapprehensive of danger, his majestic ears project above him conspicuously. But the breaking of a twig will scare him nearly to death, and then he tilts his ears back gently and starts for home. All you can see then for the next minute is his long gray form stretched out straight and streaking it through the low sagebrush, head erect, eyes right, and ears just canted a little to the rear, but showing you where the animal is all the time, the same as if he carried a jib. Now and then he makes a marvelous spring with his long legs, high over the stunted sagebrush, and scores a leap that would make a horse envious. Presently he comes down to a long, graceful lope, and shortly he mysteriously disappears. He has crouched behind a sagebrush and will sit there and listen and tremble until you get within 6 feet of him, when he will get underway again. But one must shoot at this creature once if he wishes to see him throw his heart into his heels and do the best he knows how. He is frightened clear through now, and he lays his long ears down on his back, straightens himself out like a yardstick every spring he makes, and scatters miles behind him with an easy indifference that is enchanting. Our party made this specimen hump himself, as the conductor said. The secretary started him with a shot from the Colt. I commenced spitting at him with my weapon, and all in the same instant, the old Allen's whole broadside let go with a rattling crash, and it is not putting it too strong to say that the rabbit was frantic. He dropped his ears, set up his tail, and left for San Francisco at a speed which can only be described as a flash and a vanish. Long after he was out of sight, we could hear him whiz. I do not remember where we first came across sagebrush, but as I have been speaking of it, I may as well describe it. This is easily done, for if the reader can imagine a gnarled, venerable, live oak tree reduced to a little shrub 2 feet high, with its rough brass bark, its foliage, its twisted boughs, all complete, he can picture the sagebrush exactly. Often, on lazy afternoons in the mountains, I have lain on the ground with my face under a sagebrush, and entertained myself with fancying that the gnats among its foliage were Lilliputian birds, and that the ants marching and countermarching about its base were Lilliputian flocks and herds, and myself some vast loafer from Brobdingnag waiting to catch a little citizen and eat him. It is an imposing monarch of the forest in exquisite miniature. Is the sagebrush. Its foliage is a grayish green and gives that tint to desert and mountain. It smells like a domestic sage, and sage tea made from it tastes like the sage tea which all boys are so well acquainted with. The sagebrush is a singularly hardy plant and grows right in the midst of deep sand among barren rocks where nothing else in the vegetable world would try to grow except bunch grass. Bunch grass grows on the bleak mountainsides of Nevada and neighboring territories and offers excellent feed for stock even in the dead of winter wherever the snow is blown aside and exposes it. Notwithstanding its unpromising home, bunchgrass is a better and more nutritious diet for cattle and horses than almost any other hay or grass that is known. So stockmen say. The sagebrush, the sage bushes grow from 3 to 6 or 7 feet apart, all over the mountains and deserts of the far west, clear to the borders of California. There is not a tree of any kind in the deserts for hundreds of miles. There is no vegetation at all in a regular desert, except the sagebrush and its cousin, the greasewood, which is so much like the sagebrush that the difference amounts to little. Campfires and hot suppers in the deserts would be impossible but for the friendly sagebrush. Its trunk is as large as a boy's wrist and from that up to a man's arm, and its crooked branches are half as large as its trunk. All good, sound, hard wood, very like oak. When a party camps, the first thing to be done is to cut sagebrush, and in a few minutes there is an opulent pile of it ready to use. A hole a foot wide, 2 feet deep, 2 feet long is dug, and sagebrush chopped up and burnt in it till it is full to the brim with glowing coals. Then the cooking begins, and there is no smoke, and consequently no swearing. Such a fire will keep all night with very little replenishing, and it makes a very sociable campfire, and one around which the most impossible reminiscences sound plausible, instructive, and profoundly entertaining. Sagebrush is very fair fuel, but as a vegetable, it is a distinguished failure. Nothing can abide the taste of it but the jackass and his illegitimate child, the mule. But their testimony to its nutritiousness is worth nothing, for they will eat pine knots or anthracite coal or brass fillings or lead pipe or old bottles or anything that comes handy and then go off looking as grateful as if they have had oysters for dinner. Mules and donkeys and camels have appetites that anything will relieve temporarily, but nothing satisfy. In Syria once, at the headwaters of the Jordan, a camel took charge of my overcoat while the tents were being pitched and examined it with a critical eye all over with as much interest as if he had an idea of getting one made like it. And then, after he was done figuring on it as an article of apparel, he began to contemplate it as an article of diet. He put his foot on it and lifted one of the sleeves out with his teeth and chewed at it, gradually taking it in, and all the while opening and closing his eyes in a kind of religious ecstasy, as if he had never tasted anything as good as an overcoat before in his life. Then he smacked his lips once or twice and reached after the other sleeve. Next, he tried the velvet collar and smiled a smile of such contentment that it was plain to see that he regarded that as the daintiest thing about an overcoat. The tails went next, and along with some percussion caps and cough candy and some fig paste from Constantinople. And then my newspaper correspondence dropped out, and he took a chance in that. Manuscript letters written for the home papers, but he was treading on dangerous ground now. He began to come across solid wisdom in those documents that was rather weighty on his stomach. and occasionally he would take a joke that would shake him up till it loosened his teeth. It was getting to be perilous times with him, but he held his grip with good courage and hopefully till at last he began to stumble on statements that not even a camel could swallow with impunity. He began to gag and gasp, and his eyes to stand out, and his forelegs to spread, and in about a quarter of a minute he fell over, as stiff as a carpenter's workbench, and died a death of indescribable agony. I went and pulled the manuscript out of his mouth, and found that the sensitive creature had choked to death on one of the mildest and gentlest statements of fact that I ever laid before a trusting public. I was about to say, when diverted from my subject, that occasionally one finds sage bushes 5 or 6 feet high, and with a spread of branch and foliage in proportion, but 2 or 2.5 feet is the usual height. Chapter 4. As the sun went down and the evening chill came on, we made preparations for bed. We stirred up the hard leather letter sacks and the knotty canvas bags of printed matter, knotty and uneven because of the projecting ends and corners of magazines, boxes, books. We stirred them up and redisposed them in such a way as to make our beds as level as possible. And we did improve it too. Though after all our work, it had an upheaved and billowy look about it, like a little piece of a stormy sea. Next, we hunted up our boots from odd nooks among the mail bags where they had settled and put them on. Then we got down our coats, vests, pantaloons, heavy woolen shirts from the arm loops where they had been swinging all day and clothed ourselves in them. For there being no ladies either at the stations or in the coach, and the weather being hot, we had looked to our comfort by stripping to our underclothing at 9 o'clock in the morning. All things being now ready, we stowed the uneasy dictionary where it would lie as quiet as possible, and placed the water canteens and pistols where we could find them in the dark. Then we smoked a final pipe and swapped a final yarn, after which we put the pipes, tobacco, and bag of coin in snug holes and caves among the mail bags, and then fastened down the coach curtains all around, and made the place as dark as the inside of a cow, as the conductor phrased it in his picturesque way. It was certainly as dark as any place could be, nothing was even dimly visible in it. And finally, we rolled ourselves up like silkworms, each person in his own blanket, and sank peacefully to sleep. Whenever the stage stopped to change horses, we would wake up and try to recollect where we were and succeed, and in a minute or two, the stage would be off again. And we likewise. We began to get into country now, threaded here and there with little streams. These had high, steep banks on each side, and every time we flew down one bank and scrambled up the other, our party inside got mixed somewhat. First, we would all be down in a pile at the forward end of the stage, nearly in a sitting posture, and in a second we would shoot to the other end and stand on our heads, and we would sprawl and kick to and ward off ends and corners of mailbags that came lumbering over us and about us. And as the dust rose from the tumult, we would sneeze in chorus, and the majority of us would grumble and probably say some hasty thing like, "Take your elbow out of my ribs. Can't you quit crowding?" Every time we avalanched from one end of the stage to the other, the unabridged dictionary would come too. And every time it came, it damaged somebody. One trip, it barked the secretary's elbow. Next trip, it hurt me in the stomach. And the third, it tilted Bemis's nose up till he could look down his nostrils, he said. The pistols and coins soon settled to the bottom, but the pipes, pipe stems, tobacco, canteens clattered and floundered after the dictionary every time it made an assault on us, and aided and abetted the book by spilling tobacco in our eyes and water down our backs. Still, all things considered, it was a very comfortable night. It wore gradually away, and when at last a cold grey light was visible through the puckers and chinks in the curtains, we yawned and stretched with satisfaction, shed our cocoons, and felt that we had slept as much as was necessary. By and by, as the sun rose up and warmed the world We pulled off our clothes and got ready for breakfast. We were just pleasantly in time. For 5 minutes afterward, the driver sent the weird music of his bugle winding over the grassy solitudes. And presently we detected a low hut or two in the distance. Then the rattling of the coach, the clatter of our 6 horses' hoofs, and the driver's crisp commands awoke to a louder and stronger emphasis, and we went sweeping down the station at our smartest speed. It was fascinating, that old overland stagecoaching. We jumped out in undress uniform. The driver tossed his gathered reins out on the ground, gaped and stretched complacently, drew off his heavy buckskin gloves with great deliberation and insufferable dignity, taking not the slightest notice of a dozen solicitous inquiries after his health, and humbly facetious and flattering accostings, and the obsequious tenders of service, from 5 or 6 hairy and half civilized station keepers and hostlers who were nimbly unhitching our steeds and bringing the fresh team out of the stables. For in the eyes of the stage driver of that day, station keepers and hostlers were a sort of good enough low creatures, useful in their place and helping to make up a world, but not the kind of beings which a person of distinction could afford to concern himself with. While, on the contrary, in the eyes of the station keeper and the hostler, the stage driver was a hero, a great and shining dignitary, the world's favorite son, the envy of the people, the observed of the nations. When they spoke to him, they received his insolent silence meekly, and as being the natural and proper conduct of so great a man. When he opened his lips, they all hung on his words with admiration. He never honored a particular individual with a remark, but addressed it with a broad generality to the horses, the stables, the surrounding country, and the human underlings. When he discharged a facetious, insulting personality at a hostler, that hostler was happy for the day. When he uttered his one jest, old as the hills, coarse, profane, witless, and inflicted on the same audience in the same language every time his coach drove up there, the varlets rode and slapped their thighs and swore it was the best thing they'd ever heard in all their lives. And how they would fly round when he wanted a basin of water, a gourd of the same, or a light for his pipe. But they would instantly insult a passenger if he so far forgot himself as to crave a favor at their hands. They could do that sort of insolence as well as the driver they copied it from. For, let it be borne in mind, the overland driver had but little less contempt for his passengers than he had for his hostlers. The hostlers and station keepers treated the really powerful conductor of the coach merely with the best of what was their idea of civility, but the driver was the only being they bowed down to and worshipped. How admiringly they would gaze up at him in his high seat as he gloved himself with lingering deliberation, while some happy hostler held the bunch of reins aloft and waited patiently for him to take it. And how they would bombard him with glorifying ejaculations as he cracked his long whip and went careering away. The station buildings were long, low huts made of sun dried, mud colored bricks laid up without mortar. Adobes, the Spaniards call these bricks, and Americans shorten it to dobes. The roofs, which had no slant to them worth speaking of, were thatched and then sodded or covered with a thick layer of earth, and from this sprung a pretty rank growth of weeds and grass. It was the first time we had ever seen a man's front yard on top of his house. The building consisted of barns, stable room for 12 or 15 horses, and a hut for an eating room for passengers. This latter had bunks in it for the station keeper and a hostler or two. You could rest your elbow on its eaves, and you had to bend in order to get in at the door. In place of a window, there was a square hole about large enough for a man to crawl through, but this had no glass in it. There was no flooring, but the ground was packed hard. There was no stove, but the fireplace served all needful purposes. There were no shelves, no cupboards, no closets. In a corner stood an open sack of flour, and nestling against its base were a couple of black and venerable tin coffee pots, a tin teapot, a little bag of salt, and a side of bacon. By the door of the station keeper's den outside was a tin wash basin on the ground. Near it was a pail of water and a piece of yellow bar soap. And from the eaves hung a hoary blue woolen shirt significantly. But this latter was the station keeper's private towel, and only two persons in all the party might venture to use it, the stage driver and the conductor. The latter would not, from a sense of decency. The former would not, because he did not choose to encourage the advances of a station keeper. We had towels in the valise. They might as well have been in Sodom or Gomorrah. We and the conductor used our handkerchiefs, and the driver his pantaloons and sleeves. By the door inside was fastened a small old fashioned looking glass frame, with two little fragments of the original mirror lodged down in one corner of it. This arrangement afforded a pleasant double barreled portrait of you when you looked into it, with one half of your head set up a couple of inches above the other half. From the glass frame hung the half of a comb by a string, but if I had to describe that patriarch or die, I believe I would order some sample coffins. It had come down from Esau and Samson and had been accumulating hair ever since. Along with certain impurities, in one corner of the room stood three or four rifles and muskets, together with horns and pouches of ammunition. The station men wore pantaloons, of course, country woven stuff, and into the seat and inside of the legs were sewed ample additions of buckskin to do duty in place of leggings. And when the man rode horseback, so the pants were half dull blue and half yellow, and unspeakably picturesque. The pants were stuffed into the tops of high boots, the heels whereof were armed with great Spanish spurs, whose little iron clogs and chains jingled with every step. The man wore a huge beard and mustachios, an old slouch hat, a blue woolen shirt, no suspenders, no vest, no coat, in a leathern sheath in his belt, a great long navy revolver slung on right side, hammer to the front, and projecting from his boot a horn-handled Bowie knife. Okay, let's stop for the day. I thought chapter 3 would finish, but I think we have some time. Yeah. Let's stop here. See you next time.